All right. Good evening to you all. This is Norman Sandridge here to welcome you to the third common session for Sunoikisis Ancient Leadership, fall of 2016. I'm here with a very special guest, Brook Manville, who's going to speak with us in just a moment. And then after we hear from Brook, we're going to go live and direct to our Slack chat room and invite guests in from there. But before we begin, I want to report that Kenny Morrell, who was scheduled to be the MC of this event, is not going to be joining us, at least not right away, because he is unfortunately stuck on the tarmac in Provo, Utah, as a result of a bad storm. But because we roll with the punches here at Sunoikisis and we pick each other up and bail each other out, I will be guest hosting tonight. I'm very happy for all of you who can join us live with the live stream, and those who are joining us from our 7 different institutions represented in the Sunoikisis Ancient Leadership class, and even the group of students who are taking the course online across the country and even in Greece. So hello to everyone. And welcome, and let me say hello to my friend and colleague, Brook Manville. How are you doing this evening?
Hi, Norman. How are you? And hello to everyone.
Very well. Thank you so much. We want to introduce Brook as an individual who has worn very many hats in his life. He began his career as a classicist and did his PhD at Princeton University in the late 1970s. Am I correct, Brook?
That's right.
And but left the field within a few years after having receiving his PhD, and went into management consulting. Were you at McKinsey? Am I remembering that?
That's correct, yes.
Correct. And now Brook is the president of and principal of his own leadership consulting company, and we're very, very lucky to be able to speak with him tonight because he is living classics, if you will. He is classics in application, leadership in application, and I want to talk to him a little bit first about his transition from studying classics and then move on to a discussion about Socrates. So Brook, could you begin just by giving us a little bit of your background and kind of why the transition from classicist to management consultant and leadership consultant made sense to you, and how that's gone, and what advice you might have for other people who are thinking about a transition from classics to those areas.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for inviting me. It's been fun to have this as a forcing device to think about what actually did I learn all those years and how did I put it into practice. So I finished my PhD in the late 70s. I did teach ancient history for 3 years at Northwestern University. And I was doing fine. I published a lot, but frankly, I was getting a little bit itchy and feeling like I wanted to not only live the life of the mind, I wanted to be engaged in some more action-oriented things. I had worked in business off and on through my graduate career to earn money just to pay for the graduate studies. So I went through a bit of a crisis. I applied to law school. I applied to business school. I was kind of floundering around, and I decided I would also just apply for jobs, business jobs, just see if somebody interesting, would hire me just to see what would happen. And I got an interesting offer to go work at CBS, the media company, and I took a deep breath and decided I would step off the academic track and do that. And I worked in a number of jobs in the corporate office of CBS, the broadcaster, and from there, I got into computing, and I was involved in some early technology companies. And then I think about consulting, and it's a kind of a long story, which I'll compress. But anyway, I ended up getting a job at now famous McKinsey & Company, and ended up staying there 12 years and became a partner and worked both on an internal basis, doing organization development and what we called knowledge management. And then I also worked with clients, and in the latter part of my career, I was actually in the organization practice doing leadership, organization development, organizational design, that kind of thing. So it was quite a road from being a professor of ancient history. But one of the things I found, and it was particularly true at McKinsey & Company, which is a very intellectual place, but also quite profit-oriented, that there's all sorts of ways to translate, apply, and take advantage of a good classical education. And I did. And it's something I never regretted and have never looked back. I did not take an MBA. I did not have any professional further degrees, but I always found a very rich reservoir of ideas and ways of thinking that my classical education had helped me with. So I'm happy to get into that, but that's just a short thumbnail of how I went from, professor of classics to a partner at McKinsey & Company later.
Thank you so much for that, Brooke. If I could ask a couple follow-up questions, I'm curious. Well, two things. I'm curious, did you talk about classics when you were pitching yourself for these different jobs? And did people seem to think it was kind of an intuitive fit? What you were just saying about the reservoir of ideas that you drew from. Could someone make that case back then and land a job? Given other talents as well, of course.
Well, in a few cases, the reaction I had when I was looking for jobs was, we can't imagine why you were doing this, but you're smart, we'll give you a chance. There were a couple of other opportunities that came my way, and naturally I was very attracted to them. And in fact, my later colleagues at McKinsey were front of the list on this dimension, where people said, that's really an interesting thing to do. And it's even more interesting that you want to do something different now. Tell us why, and tell us how you think it might fit. And so, the great organizations came back and said, make the case for why this fits. We think it's interesting, but we'd like to hear more. So it became, as it were, a platform. It was clearly a differentiator for some of the jobs I was going for, just because I was an unusual duck. But just to be fair, I did have some, elite university degrees, and, I had done a little bit of business work here and there through the years. So I wasn't a complete stranger, and I wasn't a complete unknown. But there were definitely politely or not so politely closed the door on me and said, we don't understand how you could possibly fit here at all. And you just have to develop a thick skin and say, that's their problem, not mine, and move on and find something else. So that's what I did. And it was a very happy marriage when I found my way into McKinsey, because that was an organization that was actually quite intrigued as opposed to confused about why somebody would have studied classics. For them, it was just another, effort to, acquire some intellectual content and to do something with it.
Yeah. Oh, that's all super fascinating, and I like your use of the term marriage there, because I think as people are pursuing a career, it really is like dating in a way, in that you have to continue to look for compatibility, and it's not about whether someone is good or bad so much as if it's a good fit. And that's really interesting that McKinsey saw that the value of that versatility and that rich background. I wonder, just before we start talking about Socrates, one final question. You mentioned that you didn't do an MBA.
Right.
Do you? How, in your sense, how well might someone do with a PhD in classics now, or an MA or something, and none of that background, if they wanted to follow in your footsteps, as it were? Or do you think now degrees have gotten so specialized that it's just kind of understood that there's a certain cursus honorum that you have to follow in order to get there, and people are not interested in completely versatile, out of the box kinds of individuals?
I actually think it's easier now, Norman. I think that there's more of an appreciation of, I'll call it, intellectual versatility. When I was really starting to knock on doors, it was the blooming age of MBAs, and everybody who was anybody was either getting a law degree or even more important in the 80s, an MBA. And so I was definitely knocking on business doors without an MBA, at least at a more senior level. But now, when I look around and I talk to my children, when I talk to younger colleagues, people I know, I think organizations are very interested in hiring people who have, experience, conceptual abilities, problem-solving abilities, experience in lots of different arenas. And, they're much more open to people coming from different backgrounds and with different degrees. And I think that's because there is this kind of meritocracy of smarts and problem solving and networks and things like that, which is much less dependent on a particular degree. And I look at my old firm, McKinsey, hires lots of people who are not MBAs now. A lot of the technology companies are hiring people who do not necessarily have technology. Problem solving, relationship management, the ability to manage information across networks and in different contexts. I mean, those are skills that are 21st century skills. And I don't see classics as much as an excuse you have to sort of explain as it once was, as much as, one more version of why I'm a smart and interesting person and you ought to talk to me. So I if anybody's listening and thinking about, gee, am I making a mistake studying classics? I think the answer is, I don't think it was ever a mistake. And I think it's less of a mistake now than it ever was because of the way the economy is changing.
Wow, this is tremendously inspiring, and I hope you'll let us break this down into little snippets to hear your authoritative and very eloquent stance on this. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we say to our students all the time, but it's really valuable to have someone with boots on the ground in the field saying things like that. I mean, I think one way maybe of thinking of this is a lot of people go to college thinking that they are living out a script that someone else has written for them. And if they follow that script, then they will make money and be happy. And it sounds like what you're saying is almost you have to be able to tell your own story and draw from the resources at hand to really make meaning out of life. It's more about making meaning out of life than it is adopting some prescribed meaning that's already there. It sounds like that's what we're more looking for.
Exactly right. And if I can invoke our soon-to-be discussed Socrates, I mean, it is, you've got to be reflective about your life. And you've got to be, when you think about professional application, you've got to see it as a challenge, and you've got to be able to explain people your story and why it makes sense. You can't sit there with your degree in classics and just passively expect them to like it and sweep you up. Most people do not have a classical education anymore. That was not true 100 years ago. If you see it as an asset and you proactively say, I'm gonna talk to whatever interviewer is interested in me and say, let me explain to you why the kind of work that I've done in my academic career matters and could be of value to what you, Mr. CEO, or whoever you are, HR person, let me explain why it may actually be a great advantage to hire somebody like me. You've got to be an advocate, but you got to do so by reflecting, what have I actually learned? What's made a difference in this education? And, that is, with all apologies to Socrates, because I'm sort of, simplifying it a little bit, but it is the reflective life. You have to be able to say, what did it mean? Why did it matter? What was the positive delta that came from spending 4 years studying classics as opposed to, sociology or biology or whatever, not to say that those things can't be valuable also, but you've got to have your platform and your story about why it made a difference. So being reflective of people.
Perfect. Well, that sets us up, I think, excellently for our transition now to talk about Socrates himself, the featured leader of the evening. And just to put things in context a little bit, for those of you who are in the chat room, the Slack chat right now on the channel September 22nd common session, you'll see that I introduced a poll there. If you haven't voted in the poll, check it out and scroll up. I'm not monitoring the chat room myself right now, but I'll check it out in just a moment. Check out the poll. I have listed the leaders that we have taken seriously so far in this course. Remember, we began with Agamemnon, and we thought a little bit about Achilles. We thought about Cleopatra, and then Antony. And tonight we have Socrates, and we can talk a little bit about Diotima in the symposium as well. But it's really worth thinking about what one of the things you might want to think about as a takeaway from this course is kind of who are the leaders, or who is the one leader that you really want to take away as your role model going forward. And we can think about Socrates now in the context of leadership that really requires thinking outside the box, being very reflective, as Brook was just saying, being very daring, being willing to go wherever the inquiry takes you, wherever the thought takes you, and having a great deal of moral courage to stand up for what you believe in. Okay, so Brook, I'm going to check out Kenny's questions here that he set up for us. Kenny asks, to begin, he says, as a classicist, you were familiar with Plato and the questions surrounding the identity and influence of Socrates from a literary, philosophical, and historical perspective. As a business consultant, did the life of Socrates or reflections about Socrates and Plato in general come up in your work with leaders?
Yes. So I'm going to say it did, but I'm going to say I'm going to use this as a way of extending the conversation that we've been having to build a little bit on the actual experience I've had. So what I want to say is, I think back on Plato and Socrates today, and I tried to connect some dots as I look back over my own career, and I tried to be, and offer some examined life, if you like, about what I learned from studying Socrates. And I'm not sure I would have been able to roll these off my tongue when I was, just starting out and having interviews and whatnot. But I would urge you to take whatever I'm saying and not so much copy it, but rather say, this is a way to think about some lessons that I am drawing from my studies that I could translate to, a work environment or a professional environment. So let me tick off 4 things that I came to see the value of. And I came to see the value. These are 4 things that can be found in the life of Socrates and the writings of Plato. And they're things that resonated with business people that I worked with and other professionals. In some cases, they themselves were living these themes. In other cases, I had the privilege of being able to sort of show them or teach them the power of these things. But they were part of I think, a very thoughtful way of doing business that I came to feel very comfortable in. So, and none of these, for those of you who have read Socrates, I'm assuming everybody has read some now, if not more. None of these are very surprising or terribly subtle, but when you translate them to a non-classroom context, they can be very powerful. The first one is the power of questions. Now, the so-called Socratic method is well known. People talk about it a lot of time, and there's actually a fairly well-developed methodology that goes along with the power, the Socratic methodology. Without dishonoring that, I just want to keep it very simple and just say, in my years working as a consultant and also a manager, I had 3 stints where I was actually not actually consulting, but actually running either a business unit or a business. The power of asking good questions. You just bathe in seeing the value of that when you read the Socratic dialogues. The whole course of thinking is organized around specific questions that Socrates is posing to his friends and his listeners. And the conversation that results, of course, is what leads to the interesting insights. In the world of consulting, there's a very old axiom, which is the most important thing that you need to do is figure out the problem to be solved. Well, that you always get to that by asking questions. What are we really trying to accomplish? Why are things not working the way they're supposed to be working today? If they were working better, what would that look like? What's holding us back from getting there from where we are today? And so on and so forth. So just the whole craft and mindset and orientation of asking questions as a means of teasing out answers, knowledge, insights. That begins with Socrates, and just making that part of your habit of thought can be so valuable in any kind of professional work that you're doing. And there's no better education to understand what that looks like than to plunge yourself into Plato's dialogues and the life of Socrates. So that's my first point. I think just the whole notion that questioning is a tool set, a toolkit that can enhance and improve your professional career and professional work. And it begins with a great study of Socrates, I would argue.
Can I jump in and ask a follow-up to that, Brooke?
Yeah.
I'm curious. One of the big questions in the back of my mind is, and this is probably a longer conversation, but do you know any leaders, know any leaders that in any way remind you of Socrates? And I won't ask you to expound on the totality of Socrates' character, but what about you talk about the asking questions? I would think there has to be probably a distinction between the kind of leader who likes to come into a leadership situation and be perceived as either a know-it-all. You actually just had a piece about this in Forbes about know-it-all consultants,
right.
Or we could think of know-it-all leaders. There are certain people that, in order to legitimize their position in a group as the leader, as the authority figure, they need to be perceived, if not as a know-it-all, at least as a know more than everybody else. But by the same token, it seems like the more Socratic leader is the one who puts ideas on the table, almost like a food, like a prepared dish, and says, okay, take a piece of this, cut it up, mix it up, question it, do whatever. I'm thinking particularly of Socrates in Plato's Phaedo, where he says, I believe that the soul survives after death, but maybe you don't. Maybe you want to question that. Can you think of leaders in either mold who have succeeded or failed because they were either too rigid or too open to questions?
Well, you're right. It is a longer conversation, but let me just briefly say, you've touched on the question of, or the difference between, I'll call it decision-making and inquiry. And I think that the good leader does both. I think you're right. Our leaders to do nothing but ask questions all the way to the grave. You do have to get to a solution, and you do have to get to a course of action. But I would suggest in the knowledge economy, if I can use that phrase, particularly when things are changing so quickly, and then there's so much expertise and knowledge that needs to be managed and brought together to get to good decisions. Part of the toolkit of leaders has to be asking questions. So I think it's both and. I don't think it's, I wouldn't want to say that there's a kind of leader that does nothing other than ask questions. Leaders also have to make decisions, and leaders also have to mobilize and gather action. But I would argue that firstly, that Socrates himself does get to answers. He doesn't only ask questions, of course. But second of all, the tools of the Socratic approach are very much the way that you can get to better decisions and better actions. So trying to differentiate too sharply between, people who make decisions and people who simply ask questions. Actually, let me build on that, because my other 3 points, actually, there's a little bit of a flow here that corresponds to what you asked about.
Great.
I think the second thing that I take away from Plato, and also Socrates as he embodies Plato's thought, is this idea, this philosophical construct, which is later called the essence. This is mostly credited to Aristotle. If you're reading Greek, you'll know the phrase "t-esti," literally, what is it? And you find that, of course, in Socratic dialogue and Plato's writings, in basic things like, what is the good life? What is justice? What is love? What is, citizenship in the Apology? And that whole idea of getting to the essence of something, what is the essential quality? When we talk about something, what do we really mean? And that kind of habit of thought was enormously valuable to me as both a consultant and a manager. I've been in so many workshops and so many, meetings where people say, well, we need to improve customer satisfaction, or we need to extend our strategy, beyond, current markets. And, you can just get so focused and so much more helpful and accurate with groups when you say, okay, so when we say customer satisfaction, what do you mean? Do you mean you want people to be happier with the products they get? Do you mean that you want them to buy more? Do you mean that you want them to refer your products to more and more people? When we talk about customer satisfaction, I'm just modeling this, we actually mean what is the essence of success that we are trying to achieve? And that opens up a whole set of conversations that most people are not very reflective about. And that's, again, to use this phrase, that's a habit of thought. When you read Socrates and Plato, you start to see, it starts out with, well, this is going to be about justice. Okay, well, what's the big deal? Well, there's 9 books or 12 books, whatever it is, of the Republic. It's a big deal. It's a very long discussion because it's not a simple idea. And most of the ideas that are central to the Platonic dialogues, and as Socrates is portrayed, start out with a relatively simple and seemingly not so complicated idea, and then through the art of Socrates, the nuance, the onion is peeled back, and you get closer and closer through some kind of back and forth dialogue to what is this really about? And that is the nature of the knowledge, but it's also the ground to a practical situation. It's often the way that you build action and consensus of a group. When everybody understands what we're trying to achieve and the nuance, and we've peeled back the onion so everybody gets on the same page, that's when you have real progress. And again, that habit of thought, I think, is found in the Platonic dialogues when you realize that a skillful asker of questions and setter of conversation, problem-solving conversation, gets put into motion.
Yeah, I'm just realizing now, Brook, how much of a Socratic figure you have sort of been in my life. You and I have known each other for several years, and I feel like every time you and I have a conversation about something, I'll tell you, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I'm doing, and you keep coming back to this Socratic point about the essence, and I can just hear ringing in my head. You're always saying, what do you mean exactly by this? And calling attention to the fact that any phrase we might happen to throw out there, or any concept like love, what do you mean by love? Like we need to be able to recognize that could mean 15 different things to people at any given moment. And in the same way, you know, the mission statement of any organization, which is so crucial, if you just look at it as a phrase on a piece of paper, people could interpret that 15 different ways. It really has to be, you know, all the members of the organization have to understand what that essence is and be able to talk about it, I would think, in similar language.
You know, this, and just to borrow from the current political narrative, I was thinking a lot about this the other day when there was this, you know, this slanging match back and forth between Donald Trump and you know, Hillary and some of her supporters, when Trump was talking about that Putin is really, you know, a fine leader, and people were jumping all over him, and then Mike Pence jumped in and said, well, he's a stronger leader than Obama. Well, again, I don't want to weigh in on you know, do I like Donald Trump or do I not? But just, you know, you saw an example in the public dialogue of, you know, TSD. What is a good leader? Is a good leader somebody who actually accomplishes a lot, or is a good leader somebody who brings a particular set of values to an endeavor and does the best that he can against those values? You know, those are two different definitions of leadership. And you know, just again, the habit of thought of always, as you run into big concepts with people who often are not reflective about it, to be able to say, what do we actually mean? How do we actually understand this concept, and what does that mean for how we're going to vote, or how we're going to, you know, work for a candidate, or how we're going to lead our own particular lives? It's going to be very, very valuable.
Exactly.
So I appreciate your compliments, but I think anybody can learn if you see Socrates not just as a fun read, but again as a set of tools with which to solve problems and to manage, you know, professional relationships.
Exactly. So I want to, just to keep things moving, I want to hear your other 2 points, but I also want to acknowledge those in the chat room are starting to ask really good questions. And one of them, I'm not even going to say what the question is, because I want to invite her to join the Hangout. Olivia, when the feed catches up to what I'm saying right now, you can follow the link to the Hangout in the chat room that I posted, and I would like you to ask your very good question to Brook directly, because I know he's going to have a good answer to it. And while we're waiting for Olivia, hopefully, to join our chat, Brook, would you like to continue the discussion with your 2 other points?
Right. Let me be fairly brief about them, because they follow from the things I've said, and also I want to make sure. I mean, how can I be praising questions at all? Great. I'll be quick here. So the third point that I thought about when I looked back on this was, I'll call it the professional role of being a gadfly. You know, in the Apology, Socrates talks about, he compares himself to a gadfly that stings the body politic and wakes it up. And I think there's a real role, and I have certainly had the benefit of that, and I've also come to appreciate gadflies that I've worked with in my professional career, where somebody who may not necessarily, you know, be going along with the group suddenly asks a stinging question. And there's value in doing that, because so many times in business situations, people fall into groupthink, or they lose track of the assumptions that they're taking for granted. And if somebody new, or somebody who's got a little bit different perspective speaks up and asks again, tell me again why we have to do this, or why is that really the need to be the deadline, or are we thinking about this strategy upside down, that we should be, you know, building our profitability instead of just growing our customer base? That can be very, very valuable. So again, that notion of being a gadfly, and of course, great consultants, I think, are often gadflies, although I don't think you have to be a consultant to be a gadfly. But and there's an element of courage, which you mentioned before, Norman. You know, to challenge the status quo. and to do so, for the good of the body politic, not just to be annoying, but I think we're going off the rails. Let me ask this very embarrassing question. Let's understand if we really are clear on our assumptions. So I think Socrates is a superb gadfly, and I think it's a role model for a valuable that people can play in their work as well. The last thing, which I think is a companion to that, is if you read with appreciation for the style of Socrates and the way he questions, I was always struck from my youngest days reading him how civil and courteous he was. He never loses his temper. He asks these very embarrassing questions. He asks these probing questions, but it's always in a way of saying, let's be reasonable here. Let's understand what we're thinking. Let's understand some of the assumptions. You have said it as this. If you said it as this, am I right that the next implication of what you said would be this, this, and this? And so there's a respect to discourse that's in the Socratic dialogues, which I think is a very valuable profession. Treating your colleagues and even your adversaries with respect. I mean, in the apology, he's practically, literally apologizing. That's the English translation. But he's very courteous to this jury, and it's a professional demeanor. It's respecting other points of view. It doesn't mean you agree with them. In fact, many cases he's devastating them with his insights and his questions. But a demeanor of being intellectually tough, but civil and respecting your interlocutors and your audience, I think is a life skill. And again, you can learn a lot as you sit and read Socratic dialogues, thinking about that, and think about, in the next workshop or meeting in my company that I'm at, how would I behave with the love and respect that Socrates shows his audience?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely
tough.
Yeah. I love that point. And I've always found that an honest question is one of the most polite things someone can ever do, rather than offer an answer or talk over someone, just to say, I don't understand this. I think a lot of times people think Socrates does understand and that he's just being manipulative by his questions. But it's a skill I've tried to cultivate over time. Well, I want to unmute and introduce here Olivia Sanderson, and neither Brook nor I knows Olivia. So we want to welcome you, but we want to ask you also to introduce yourself to us and to the group. And I'm trying to unmute you here. Can you hear us, Olivia? All right, let me see. Have you muted yourself? Can you unmute yourself? Wait, I must have muted you, and it's not.
I see Olivia's lips moving, but I don't hear her.
And for some reason, it's not letting me unmute you. Oh,
okay.
Now, yeah. Okay, welcome, Olivia. Who are you?
I am a almost graduated English major at Findlay University.
Wonderful.
Or University of Findlay, whichever you want to put.
I'm going to meet you in person in a couple weeks.
Yes, you are.
Excellent. And Findlay University, let's let everybody know, is where?
Findlay, Ohio. It's probably like 2 hours from where Cedar Point's located. Everybody knows Cedar Point, so.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Hi, Olivia. How are you?
Hey, I'm good.
So Olivia had a wonderful question, and I thought, since we're winging this whole hangout, this would be it would be wonderful for Brook to hear your question directly, and maybe you guys can have a little conversation back and forth. So fire away.
Okay. I wanted to know what your opinion was on when people say that someone's a natural born leader. Like, do you think someone can be naturally born as a leader, or is it something that you obtain the skills over time or experience?
You know, Olivia, that's almost as old a question as what is justice.
Pretty much.
But it's very current. It comes up all the time. I've worked with a lot of, you know, so-called emerging leaders in my business situation. Of course, it always comes up. And the answer, as best as I can come up, will not surprise you. And that is, I think it's always some combination. It's clear that some people have more of a disposition or talent to leadership kinds of acts or qualities. But I also believe that everybody can develop, you know, and make themselves better in most, if not all, of those leadership qualities. So, you know, it's kind of like, I play tennis on a fairly amateur level. I know I will never be at Wimbledon, but I can definitely get better than I used to play tennis. And I think you've got to have a little bit of natural orientation, but I think everybody has that spark. I mean, that's part of Greek culture, that every man and every woman, every person has some spark of specialness about them. So part of leadership is, I think, discovering it and then building it, and then building up some of those specific skills and talents that all leaders have, having to do with creating vision, creating alignment, building consensus of people for action. I think those are things you can learn. Now, some will always be better than you or me, but I think we can all get better at doing some of the same things.
So I want to ask both Olivia and Brook a specific version of this question, which actually came up in my class today. It's a question I've wrestled with for a long time, and I wonder if Brook has ever even read any literature on this. And Olivia, I'd be interested in your opinion on this too. Could someone choose, Brook, we've talked a lot tonight about the importance of asking questions, and obviously there are environments where that is nurtured and encouraged, and obviously environments where that's not. But as an individual, can a person choose to be more curious, or is curiosity one of these things that you either innately have or you don't have? You know, this actually curiosity we could even use as a synonym for eros. Diotima in the symposium talks about this, like that there are some people who are just not aware that they lack beauty and lack knowledge and nobility and all these things, and therefore they don't think that they need them. But as I say, I wonder, maybe Olivia, do you have a view about this? And I'd love to hear Brook's view. Can someone choose to be more curious, or are you either naturally curious or not naturally curious? Sorry to put you on the spot, but talk now? Please, yeah, I want to hear what you think. You're about to graduate with an English major. Did you decide to be curious at some point, or is it just? I think you can
definitely choose to be curious. I think there's certain points in your life where you're more likely. I actually work in a daycare, and they are naturally curious about everything. But I mean, as you get older, it just gets harder to make that choice to be curious. I don't think it ever goes away. I think that people that are just more open to it and don't shut that out, it's kind of like people that can stay young at heart. You are able to sit back and say, you know what, I'm curious. Can I do this? Can I learn this? Can I experience this? Is this a possibility? And there's some people that are like, nope, I'm a grown-up now. I've got to shut that part off. But I think it's always in you. I think it's just a matter of choosing to let it out. Just like any other leisure activity, you have to choose to say, I want to enjoy being curious, or I want to learn about something new. I want to expand my horizons. It's all part of curiosity, and that's something that you have to choose to do.
Cool, thank you. And Brook, what do you think?
I like what Olivia said. Children are naturally curious. I think it's part of being a young human. That's how you learn and how you develop. And I also agree with her that that society tends to constrain us such that we can't be quite as curious when we're 25 years old as we were when we were 5. But I do think, to your point, Norman, that some people are more curious than others. If we're talking about adults, I've met people who name the topic and they want to learn more about it. They're excited. They want to read a book about it. They want to talk to you about it. I mean, they just love it. Other people, not so much. If it's not on their radar screen, they don't want to go there. They're very focused. But even the latter kind of person, and there's room in the world for both, and the world is filled with both. I have seen, leaders who are not at all intellectually curious till or they need to do something new in order to survive, or they need to build a new business, and suddenly they want to know everything about it. And it's not so much curiosity, but just, I'll call it the passion for inquiry. Sometimes that inquiry can be much more focused and intentional, whereas we probably tend to define curiosity more as, interested in almost anything. So I think there's room for curious style behavior, even for people who are very, very focused, and that's how they learn and how they get ahead.
That's a really interesting distinction that we've happened upon here, Brook. I haven't done a whole lot of study into the field of curiosity. There's a really interesting book by, I think it's an English professor, actually, Olivia, named Susan Ingalls. She has, I think her book is called The Hungry Mind, and she talks about a distinction there that's very similar to what we were talking about here, that there are some people, as you say, whatever the topic comes up, they're just interested in it. Plato talks about people like this in the Republic, and he talks about them having philomatheia, which is literally a love of learning. They just, they're like sponges, and you give them anything and they want to understand it. But Plato, when he's talking about philomatheia, he also talks about the term philosophia, which is what Plato is really interested in, and he makes a distinction with philosophia that's very much along the lines of what Brook has been talking about throughout his remarks tonight, and that is the person who has philosophia, or a love of wisdom, really is that person who wants to know T esti, what is this? And so, when it comes time to focus, they bear down on a question and really get to the essence of something, and they dig deeper and deeper and deeper until they have a mastery of it. For Plato, it's understanding the oneness of something, and probably in a business environment, it's probably kind of understanding the mission of the organization, or understanding the cosmos of that organization in its oneness, or in its totality. So I think it's interesting that Plato talks about this distinction in the Republic. We see it. I wish I could remember the terms in the literature on curiosity, that there are these two types of people, and we're seeing it here just come up in conversation. Really, really neat stuff. Olivia, did you have any other questions? We have only about 10 more minutes. And by the way, Brook had initially agreed to talk for about 20 minutes tonight. Brook, I already owe you a lunch and probably three martinis on top of this. But if you'll let us have 10 more minutes of your time, we can wrap up this session. And I want to see if there's anybody else in the chat room who might maybe want to join us and ask a question or two. I have one more for Brook that pushes back on this idea of Socrates as being a nice guy, and I'm going to channel my inner Kenny, who can't be here right now if I do it. But Olivia, before you say goodbye, do you have any other questions? Thank you so much for joining us spontaneously like this, and I look forward to meeting you in a couple weeks.
It's my pleasure. I didn't have another question, but just a comment. Like I said, I do work with children, and you guys are talking about how some people just are always digging deeper and deeper and deeper. Even as kids, I have some kids that you can give them one answer and they're okay with that. I've got other kids that will just keep asking more and more questions. So maybe it's a natural thing for curiosity, and maybe some of us are just more prone to be more curious. So
I think that's probably right.
Not really the evidence for that.
Yeah.
I think I'm losing some of this.
No, that's fine. Well, I think building. I think your observation of children has obviously taught you a lot, Olivia. I would urge you to keep thinking about it in the context of this conversation, because you can learn a lot observing children.
Oh yes, a lot.
Norman, are you still there? Maybe we lost Norman.
Yeah, I can't see him either.
Yes, I am. I'm here.
Okay.
I'm looking for the book by Susan Engel, and I'm going to post it in the chat room right now for people.
Okay.
So I'll post it here. It's a really fascinating book. I mean, as I say, she's an English professor herself, I'm pretty sure, and she goes through her experience with curiosity and being a curious person at a really young age. And one of the things that I've always found to be an interesting connected field of curiosity is the idea of collecting. And I always ask my students, when you were really young, did you ever collect things like rocks or comic books or baseball cards or whatever, such that there was kind of this hunger that could almost culminate into a quest? For fun, for me with baseball cards, it was always, the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle with, in mint condition with apple cheeks and perfect corners, and you would almost fetishize it. But it could be with anything, whether it's ladybugs or butterflies, or that I think that's part and parcel of the curious person's experience. So anyway, we'll say bye to Olivia, and I want to see if anybody else in the chat room wants to join us. I'm checking right now to see. Okay, nobody wants to join in. So Brooke, I want to play whatever the opposite of devil's advocate. I was trying to think of what is the opposite of loving Socrates. This has so far been, I think, a very warranted love fest for Socrates, but I want to pick up an aspect of his personality that maybe is not very leaderly, or is potentially not very leaderly. And I'm looking for a quote right now that I'm going to bring it. I'm going to post it. So Joel Christensen, who is teaching this course from Brandeis, posted on Facebook today in our on our page. He posted a quote from Socrates as he is in Xenophon and the apology there. And I'm going to post the quote in our chat here, and I'm going to read it. This is what Socrates says as he's saying goodbye to the Athenian jury members in Xenophon's version of the apology. It's a little bit more of a thumbing your nose at everyone. He says, "Do you really find it shocking if it seems better to the god that I die now? Don't you know before today I would never agree that any man has lived better than I have. This is the greatest pleasure, to know that my entire life has been lived righteously and justly. For this reason I have regarded myself well, and I have found that those who know me feel the same way." Now, if this age were to proceed, he goes on to say, if I'm already old, who cares if I die? These are the terrible years anyway. I'm over 70. Who cares? But so I'm curious, in a leadership context, if it is possible to have a leader who is too righteous or too just or too uncompromising. The Greek word that we always pick up on when we talk about Socrates and Xenophon is megal-agoria, which literally means like boastful speech or something like that. It's like Socrates knows that he's awesome. Right. And I wonder, Brooke, do you encounter leaders where their awesomeness is off-putting, and there's almost maybe like a lack of emotional intelligence or a lack of awareness of the impact that your quest for truth or your righteousness or your reputation for wisdom may be having on other? I mean, because at the end of the day, as much as we admire Socrates, he lost, and he lost big time. At least as a normal trial would go. So what do you think about that as we wrap up our common session?
Well, one of the great dangers of leadership or leaders, I think, is that they become much more arrogant now. And people, I mean, you know, again, we don't want to go into the political campaign of the presidential candidates. We'll never finish in the next 3 minutes. But yeah, you know, of course it's a big problem. I think the more nuanced version of what you're asking is, can you be arrogant while appearing to be really humble? I think that in the Apology, some of the readings of the Apology, and of course there's a whole debate which you know touched on about the Socrates of Plato versus the Socrates of Xenophon. We won't get into that question of which one is more real. But let's just take for the moment that, you know, a lot of the readings of the Apology are that, you know, there's some people who write, you know, Socrates deserved to die. He was a pain. He was pretending to be humble and pretending to care for Athens, but you know, he was really just trying to show how smart he was. He made fun of everybody, you know, in his very, you know, elegant way. It netted out that they were really all pretty much more stupid than he was. And sooner or later, organizations or communities, including Athens, don't want to put up with that, and he deserved to die. So you know, you can read the Apology that way. I don't. It's not the way I prefer to read it. But I do think the generic question of, can you carry the Socratic pose and the Socratic approach too far? I think is a very good one. It's an important leadership question. Yes, it's good to ask a lot of questions. Yes, it's good to show the errors of your opponent's arguments. But can you carry it too far? And I think the answer is yes, you can. What I think justifies a more favorable view of Socrates does authentically care about the good of the city of Athens. And it seems to me, in fact, there's an interesting article that I will put on the chat board, which my friend and sometimes colleague Josh Ober just published about Socrates' Apology. And, you know, he argues that, you know, the core of understanding Socrates in the Apology is it's the ultimate civic engagement. You know, he is embracing deeply, you know, the city-state that gave him birth and made him who he was, and his challenges are fundamentally, you know, desperate attempts to make it better. So, you know, I think if you really do care about the stakeholders, whoever that may be, that you are challenging and advising, I think, you know, a certain amount of cleverness and even occasional arrogance is maybe tolerable. If you don't care about showing how brilliant you are and you don't really care what happens in the end, then I think you deserve to die. I don't think that's the right Socratic way to live a life. I don't think that's not eudaimonia. So, you know, that's my view. But I do think it's a good leadership question. Can you carry the gadfly role to excess? Can you fall prey to arrogance by being clever through the kind of questioning that Socrates does? And I think it's a risk, yes.
All right. Well, we will, in true Socratic fashion, then we will end with a question. And, you know, just let me say, Brook, thank you so much. This has easily been the most meaningful and interesting hour of my week. I hope everybody out there who has been watching and following in the chat has also benefited. We subtitled this course, An Ancient Imagining of the Future of Leadership. And for me, this conversation tonight was an absolutely perfect textbook example of how to translate and transform ancient ideas into contemporary practice, but even future practice. I mean, we're really looking beyond the now when we're trying to use Socrates as a model of leadership, or at least as a focal point for leadership. So again, let me say thank you so much And thanks to everybody who is watching out in YouTube land, to all of the students. Just a brief announcement. We are transitioning as of now to our next module, which will be on This is Sparta. This is going to be Jim Capriti from Hobart and William Smith Colleges, his module called The Song Remains the Same. It will be about how a leader and an entire people, namely the Spartans, try to maintain their identity as a heroic martial culture, even in the face of humiliating defeat. So it will be about leadership and rhetoric, and leadership and identity from an amazing ancient culture, the Spartans, that many of you will be familiar with from the movie The 300. So we look forward to beginning that module now, and we look forward to seeing Jim as the MC for next week and all that he will bring to that event. So again, thank you to Brook, and good night to everyone, and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Thank you again, Norman. I enjoyed it, and best of luck with this.